Trump's so-called strongman act just shattered because America's top military leaders are done with him. Generals who once saluted now call him an embarrassment. Retired commanders are breaking ranks on live TV, exposing Trump's reckless missions, illegal strikes, and blatant politicization of the armed forces. One even said he felt compelled to defend the honor of the military from the commander-in-chief himself. Think about that. Career soldiers risking everything to warn the country their own president is out of control, and now senators from both parties are backing them. This isn't loyalty. This is collapse, and it's happening right now.
Were you saying last night when you said you were prepared to send more than the National Guard into American cities?
Sure, I would do that if it was necessary. You know, if it was necessary to do that, but it hasn't been necessary. We're doing a great job without that. It was necessary. As you know, I'm allowed to do that.
Even other branches of the military you would send in, or
Who are you with?
the New York Times?
That's very good. Very good. Well, if you're writing directly, I'll give it to you.
Tonight, the stakes aren't abstract, they're constitutional. When a commander-in-chief talks like domestic streets are battlefields and treats the military like a personal police force, the line between democracy and something darker starts to blur. And this week, you could feel that line harden, because the people who know that line best, the ones who wore the uniform, are saying enough.
The word I kept hearing from them was embarrassment, because if you look at that picture and you listen or have viewed what happened yesterday in Quantico, you saw myriad numbers of Silver Star awards. You saw myriad Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, combat infantry badges, and they were being lectured on how to do push-ups and lose weight and shave. And it was truly mortifying. But the larger question is, going forward, what happens to the military with this internal dissension that you can seemingly feel when you witness an event like yesterday?
Here's what happened and why it matters. In a series of appearances and staged Support the Troops moments, Donald Trump once again tried to launder political power through military imagery. Rally backdrops, uniforms, tough talk. But the reaction from within the military community wasn't the chest-thumping approval he expected. It was shame, anger, a sense that the institution was being used. Let's be clear and simple. The core conflict is whether we will be a nation where civilian leaders respect the military's apolitical mission and lawful limits, or a nation where one man wraps himself in the flag to bulldoze the rulebook. That's the through line. It runs through every story we're covering tonight. When veterans, officers, and career NCOs start publicly describing embarrassment, that's not optics. That's a breach of trust. It's the quiet contract between the people and the uniform. You serve the Constitution, not a politician. In return, leaders don't use you as props or pawns.
So all of the folks in that room have been wearing the uniform for 30 or 40 years. They have 20 years of experience in 2 wars or maybe more, and they kind of know what they're doing and they know how to control and command and lead their soldiers. So when you're told to do things that run contrary to what the experiences are that these folks bring into the room, it becomes very troubling. And I think I won't speak for all of them, but I have spoken to a few that were in that room, and they were troubled by what they heard. And they're afraid of how it's going to affect the American people at the same time. What do our citizens feel about what the military will do, should do, can do? There are a lot of our fellow citizens who tell me, hey, why don't you guys do something about this? Well, that's not what we do. We obey the orders of the civilian authority unless they're illegal. And we don't interfere potentially in politics. So all of those things play a part of, truthfully, what the military does, who we are, that a lot of people don't understand, and how we conduct operations. And many of the things we've been hearing in terms of strategy and operations and what we're being asked to do are contrary to what we see as the values and the ideologies of our nation.
And look at the caliber of the folks raising alarms. 30, 40 years in, multiple deployments, combat decorations, not from parades, but from hard. Ugly days, most politicians only visit with a camera crew. When they're told to do things that contradict experience, training, and law, they don't shrug. They warn us, because they've seen how bad orders destroy good units and countries. This isn't just about tone. It's about truth. Retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former commander of U.S. Army Europe, called out the politicization and the mistruths. Hertling doesn't go on TV to score points. He goes on to defend the profession of arms. And when a general with that resume says he feels compelled to push back, you listen. Now, patterns matter. Under Trump's leadership, we've seen waves of departures from the senior ranks. People nudged out not for misconduct, but for disagreeing with bad policy. That's not disloyalty. In the military, disagreement, honest professional advice is part of the job. That's how you prevent disasters before they land on a tarmac in black bags. Personal courage isn't only about running toward fire. It's also about telling a superior, "Sir, that's unlawful," or "Ma'am, that will get our people killed." When officers do that and the response is, "You don't belong here, retire," that's a political purge by another name. And purges don't make forces stronger. They make them brittle.
It is not rare for a general to retire early because of misgivings or whatever. But so far in the Trump administration, we've had almost 20 of them who have been asked to leave of all different ilks. And some of the ones that were asked to leave or retire were some of the very best and brightest. And you can't see where they've done anything wrong. It's just disagreement. And disagreement, as we learn in the military, is not disrespect. The other thing that I'd say, one of the Army's 7 professional values is personal courage. And that's just not personal courage on the battlefield. It's personal courage in terms of speaking up and offering your advice, because that's what military folks are asked to do. And I think in both of these cases, they gave their advice, and it was so counter to what the Department of Defense is trying to do right now that instead of, saluting and driving on, they were told, "You don't belong in this organization anymore, so you need to retire."
Here's where the stakes hit the ground. Reports in the same coverage describe a senior naval commander abruptly retiring amid internal friction over the legality and strategy of maritime strikes in the region. That's not a scheduling conflict. That's a blinking red light that the mission, as ordered, may not square with law or logic. And then we hear about casualties, dozens dead across 7 strikes, and conflicting claims about who was targeted and why. If your government can't name the targets, can't present evidence, and starts repatriating detainees because there's nothing to charge, that's not strength. That's an admission something's off the rails. Strength isn't how loud you shout, cartel. Strength is proving you hit the right target within the law. Even Republican voices are saying it out loud. Senator Rand Paul on Fox called these extrajudicial killings absent a declaration of war or presented evidence. You don't have to agree with Rand Paul on anything else to recognize the constitutional point. If you're not in a congressionally authorized war, due process doesn't vanish because a president says the word drugs into a microphone.
I think that there's always a choice, and you're right about the demand issue, and I wish that we could do more about that. And this has been going on forever, that we have a drug consumption problem here and a drug supply problem coming from South and Latin America. So I totally get that. But when you're looking at how this fight is being executed at this particular moment, it doesn't make a lot of sense. First and foremost, the fact that no one can confirm that we've actually been taking out narco traffickers or huge drug traffickers, however you want to say it. And last week when we were talking about this, Dana had just seen the alert that the that the admiral in charge of the Southern Command had resigned. And he was the one who was in charge of this. And the reporting is that he wasn't comfortable with the mission and had been pushing back within the Pentagon. And do you think he would have resigned if everything was by the book? So we have 32 people that have been killed so far, 7 individual strikes. We know that the Colombian president is alleging at least that an innocent fisherman was murdered. We know that there's a family from Trinidad who's saying that a member of their family was killed. And then it is really important that we have repatriated 2 people, one to Colombia, one to Ecuador, because that indicates that we don't have any evidence to prosecute them, that we didn't know who these guys were. Because if you did have evidence, you would bring them before a court. And I know that you're going to make fun of me, and I am prepared for it each and every day. But drug traffickers also have rights. The law applies. We should have the evidence. They should be charged with something, and they should come before a court of law. And Rand Paul was on the Sunday shows this weekend, and he said to Kristen Welker, when you kill someone, if you're not in a declared war, which we are not, Congress with the war powers, you really need to know someone's name at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all these people have been blown up without any evidence of a crime. They're also saying that it's about fentanyl, and people who analyze the area are saying that there is drugs that go through, but it's mostly cocaine and marijuana that are headed actually to Europe and to Africa. So the government story is not adding up.
Zoom out. Authoritarians use the military to bypass politics. Democracies use politics to restrain the military. One path ends with photo ops and fear. The other ends with law, messy, slow, accountable law, which is why you're now seeing something rare. Democrats like Tim Kaine and Adam Schiff joining Republicans to demand the White House seek authorization before any further lethal operations. That is what real oversight looks like in a crisis.
You, Senator Paul, what do you need to hear in a briefing? What questions do you have?
You know, it's not so much about a briefing, but we haven't had a briefing. To be clear, we've got no information. I've been invited to no briefing. But a briefing is not enough to overcome the Constitution. The Constitution says that when you go to war, Congress has to vote on it. And during a war, then, there's a lower rules for engagement. People do sometimes get killed without due process. But the drug war or the crime war has typically been something we do through law enforcement. And so far, they have alleged that these people are drug dealers. No one said their name. No one said what evidence. No one said whether they're armed. And we've had no evidence presented. So at this point, I would call them extrajudicial killings. And this is akin to what China does, to Iran does with drug dealers. They summarily execute people without presenting evidence to the public. So it's wrong.
Number one, there is no fentanyl made in Venezuela. Not just a little bit, there's none being made in Venezuela. These are outboard boats that in order for them to get to Miami would have to stop and refuel 20 times. They're in all likely going to Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island right off of the coast of Venezuela. So there's a lot of reasons to be worried about this. But number one is the broader principle of when can you kill people indiscriminately? When you're at war. That's why when we declare war, it's supposed to be done by Congress. It's supposed to be thoughtful. It's supposed to be debated. And we're not supposed to do it willy-nilly. And then when you have war, you just kill people in the war zone. And even then there are rules of engagement. But interdicting drugs has always been a criminal activity and a criminal anti-crime sort of activity where we don't just summarily execute people. We actually present evidence and convict them.
Let's talk hypocrisy. The same political faction that shouted "back the blue" spent years smearing generals as weak or woke when those generals refused to bend doctrine to Twitter tantrums. They said law and order, then ordered around the law. They wrapped themselves in the troops, then punished the troops who told the truth. Those are tells. They reveal the project, loyalty to a man, not to the mission. And those tells ripple, so the members can smell when institutions are being used. Morale doesn't fall off a cliff overnight. It erodes. First, you lose the specialists who can go anywhere. Then, mid-grade leaders start quietly looking for the exit. The units still deploy. The patch still looks sharp. But the experience that makes hard calls safer, it's thinner. And the people who pay for that erosion aren't pundits. They're 19-year-olds far from home. Here's the legal core I want everyone to have in plain English. The president is the commander-in-chief. That's real authority. But it's not limitless. Congress declares war. Congress funds or defunds operations. The courts adjudicate when rights are trampled. The military follows lawful orders. If those guardrails seem fussy or slow, that's the point. We restrain the most violent power the state has, the use of force, because history shows what happens when you don't. And we've been here before. Think of the generals in past administrations who stood up, not because they were against the president, but because they were for the institution, for the apolitical, rules-bound nature of the job. That's what Hertling's criticism is about. It's not partisanship, it's professional ethics. It's the oath. Defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, not defend a politician's public relations strategy. Let's get visceral about stakes. If you let any president conjure war powers on domestic soil or offshore without oversight, the template gets copied. Today's emergency becomes tomorrow's re-election stunt. The target shifts from cartel kingpins to protest leaders, from smugglers to journalists under the pretext of security. You think that's dramatic? Ask countries that slid this way. Their first step wasn't tanks. It was language. Then came the law. Then came the knock at the door. And if you served, you know the quiet moral injury when your work is misused. You trained to be lethal and lawful. You accepted risk so a free people wouldn't have to. When politicians reduce that to a stage prop, it chips at the pride you carry in your bones. The result isn't just anger, it's detachment. That's poison for readiness. So what do we demand from leadership? Any leadership. Clear objectives, legal authority, transparency after action, accountability when things go wrong. Respect for the professionals who say, "Sir, this plan breaks the rules." That's not weakness. That's the difference between a republic and a regime, between strategy and a stunt. And to those saying, well, the border, the drugs, do something. Yes, do something smart and legal. Invest in demand reduction. Hit transnational networks with joint law enforcement, intelligence, financial sanctions, real extraditions. When you use military tools, do it under a framework that's authorized, scoped, and audited. Because if you skip the framework, you don't just risk hitting the wrong boat. You burn the very authority you'll need when a real war comes. Back to the through line. Rule of law versus one-man rule in a flag-draped costume. Tonight we saw the profession push back. Retired brass speaking plainly. Active duty culture showing strain. Even Republican senators forcing the constitutional question. Who decides when America kills? The answer must never be whoever shouts loudest. It must be the Constitution, through Congress, through courts, through commanders who refuse unlawful orders. This is the moment to choose. Not left versus right, law versus impulse, institutions versus images. If we want a military the country can trust, we have to be a country the military can trust, one that keeps faith with the rules that keep power in check. 2 sentences to close. Patriotism isn't a photo. It's restraint under pressure. And tonight, the most patriotic voices were the ones telling a president, follow the law or step aside.